Welcome to Star Wars Action News, helping Star Wars collectors collect better. Hello everyone, this is Brock. Glad to be here again on Star Wars Action News, and we are back here to talk about our annual publishing year in review. And of course, when I say we, I am not just talking to me and myself. I am talking to the amazing Nathan P. Butler. Nathan.
Hey everybody, it takes, a year to get me to crawl out of my hole again, so I'm here.
This is the first time you've been on a Swan show since last year when we did this? Is that what you're saying?
I think so. It kind of blurs together, but very likely. We were talking about the book or something.
It might be. Yeah, I can't remember if that ran this year or not, but I know you were on the show about that. And of course, if you have no idea what we're talking about, Nathan wrote an awesome book of the Saga on Home Video, which we talked about on last year's year in review, and you can hear that in the archive section at swactionnews.com. We are not going to cover that again, although I'm sure Nathan would love it. And of course, if you haven't bought a copy already, you probably bought one for your loved one for the holidays. I read the book from cover to cover and I enjoyed it. So congratulations on that once again, Nathan. So today we're going to talk about the year in review in publishing. And what that really means, of course, folks, is we're going to talk about novels. We're going to talk about a little bit of junior novels, the reference guides, all sorts of books that come out. And then on top of that, there are the comics. There are the role-playing games and various different things that include publishing. So we're going to try to cover it as quickly as possible without going into too depth, although we will discuss things here and there. We are going to start off where, of course, I think we always should, because that's what I do here at Star Wars Action News, is the novels. This year we actually had, surprisingly, we only had like 3 or 4 novels, but they all came out with junior novelizations, so it kind of seems like more. The junior novelizations, I think, lapped the actual adult novelizations. We'll get to the titles in just a minute, but in case you were waiting, I know back when I was short on cash for quite a few years, I would wait from the hardcovers to get on paperback. And this year we saw the Thrawn, Timothy Zahn's Thrawn novel come out on paperback, Battlefront 2, Inferno Squad, Phasma, Canto Bight, Rebel Rising, a new version for some reason of Leia, Princess of Alderaan, and Last Shot, which we'll be talking about later in today, a book that came out in the spring. They actually released a paperback version. Quick turnaround on that one, as well as the Last Jedi novelization. So if you're looking for a little bit lighter on your pockets, that's the way to do it. But we're going to start off with the Star Wars Last Jedi Expanded Edition hardcover. I reviewed this earlier in the year. They also had a simultaneous junior novel, also reviewed earlier in the year. Nathan, did you find this Expanded Edition moniker as annoying as I do?
Yes and no. I mean, the fact that you have to call it an expanded edition, even though, it's an adaptation, I think that is irksome. I think it brings shades of special edition, but
yes,
I mean, it is an apt name. I'm fond of using the term that I coined years ago on, I guess it was Chrono Radio back in the day, which was the Stover effect. The idea that you could read a novelization of something or an adaptation of something, and it gives you enough new background information or new perspectives that it really enhances viewing the main material. If you read the novelization by Matthew Stover of Revenge of the Sith, it makes the film feel a lot deeper in some cases. And I think that's sort of what they're going with here. It's not just a matter of adding a few extra scenes here and there, kind of like we saw with Attack of the Clones novelization years ago. Instead, what we're getting here in a lot of ways are extra connective tissue and answers to questions that would have been a little tricky to address on screen. Things like, how is Rey able to do all these things she's able to do without actually having had formal training? And they go into that. What about,
wait. They go into that briefly.
Enough to give us an answer.
I think the expanded edition, to me, when you read a novelization, and I know there's Stover effect, and I've talked about these, the Attack of the Clones novelization is a go-to example of what I think an expanded edition would be. A lot of additional scenes. And nowadays, the expanded edition, the extra scenes they have in the book, which is what they talk about in the promotional materials, are the ones you see on the DVD anyway. So the connective tissue that you're talking about, I think is there, but to me it's weak. I think a novelization has extra stuff in it because it's based on an earlier version of the screenplay or a lesser edited version of the actual movie. I think it's redundant to say expanded edition. I found the perspective that you have on expanded edition much more true for the Solo, A Star Wars Stories expanded edition novelization than for The Last Jedi. I felt that added scenes gave a lot of perspective, especially how the book opened, gave a lot more perspective on Kira and Han on their life on that planet. The junior novelization kind of stripped all that out and was very basic, but the novelization of Solo, A Star Wars Story was a breath of fresh air, and I totally got what you're talking about there. I also found the author, Mur Lafferty, to be a breath of fresh air as well. She just wrote with such fun, and you could tell she was having fun while she was writing it. She really got what the movie was going for, the lightheartedness, but still a Star Wars kind of thing. So I really enjoyed that novelization more than The Last Jedi one. I'm glad that she came into the Star Wars universe, and I hope she does it again. Did you enjoy the solo Star Wars Expanded Edition novel?
To be honest, I'm about halfway through it. This was the novel that was released right after my Star Wars Timeline Gold had its final edition, and I was able to say I'm free of having a time constraint on when I have to read these novels. But I'll say that this is the one that feels much more to me like a lot of what I'm seeing feels like it was deleted scenes, as opposed to giving me a lot of new perspective. But part of that is probably because I had read Most Wanted first, so I had that background feeling of Han and Kira before picking up the novelization.
And I did not read that one. That's one junior novel this year. I did not actually. It's the only junior novel I did not read this year. So I'm glad to hear that. Was it like Catalyst, a Rogue One story?
No, actually, what we got with Most Wanted was kind of trying to do sort of a Rebel Rising / Leia Princess of Alderaan / whatever, where it's trying to give us, some perspective on these teens kind of acting like teens, but yet in their situation. And it was decent enough. It gives us a reason for why Han and Kira trust each other, how they start working together at all, why is Kira in the position that she's in, and that sort of thing, and a little bit of background on them. I think since it doesn't do what a lot of those books do, which is that time jumping thing, like we saw with Lost Stars, for instance, and Rebel Rising, we don't get much of a life story so much as we basically get events happening less than a year before the film. It gives you a better reason for why these two would, be close to each other, why they would trust each other in the film, because the film just kind of assumes that a little bit. They do more on screen to build it up than perhaps building up why Anakin falls to the dark side in Revenge of the Sith, but they certainly don't delve too deep into that friendship before they get thrust apart. So we see it more from Han's side, and the book at least allows us to see a little bit of both.
Okay. That's a tie-in, of course, when Solo, a Star Wars story, came out in May. They released that young adult junior novel, I should call it, around that time because the novelization didn't come out until the movie was released on home video, just like The Last Jedi. During the same time as the movie came out, they did release Last Shot, which was the Han and Lando novel. I reviewed that already for this show. You can hear that in the archive section. And that, of course, had a lot of time jumping going on, and I'm not going to go too much into that because here comes a perfect segue, folks. The sequel to last year's Thrawn, Timothy Zahn's surprise, wonderful novel of last year, they had a sequel, Thrawn Alliances, which has almost the exact same structure, in my mind, of Last Shot. It has two different timelines. They go back and forth. But the cool thing about this one was that instead of having modern day, then you have a Han Solo story that was preview story, and then you have a Lando preview story, and then see how all three of those things combine. So the flashback story is Anakin during the Clone Wars with Thrawn still in wild space. And then the modern day story is Grand Admiral Thrawn with Darth Vader. And it's two different characters, but it's still the same character. Unfortunately, I found the actual story to be a little mundane. Put all the pieces together, and it really turned out to be a pretty weak mystery. It really drove me crazy how, if you ever read a Thrawn novel, it's either Captain Pelion or when the other Thrawn novel, it had the young cadet whose name is leaving my mind right now, who plays Dr. Watson to Thrawn's Sherlock Holmes. Well, here you have Anakin and Darth Vader playing Watson, which I found completely out of character for both of them. So it was really difficult for me to enjoy this book because I couldn't get past all these problems. I welcomed the sequel, but I unfortunately did not have that good a time with it. Nathan, did you enjoy Thrawn Alliances more than I did?
Not particularly, no. I think that this was an instance of, and you see this a lot in publishing, where it's Timothy Zahn coming back in, this is awesome, so let's seed some little things, some little mentions in the first book to kind of justify a second book. Hey, I knew Vader when he was still Anakin. Ooh, in the Clone Wars, what was that about? Well, here's another book to read. I felt like this was a book where the two stories were so loosely connected, it probably should have been two separate books, two separate shorter books, right? Yeah. Or two separate shorter stories. The connective tissue wasn't very heavy. And you're right, the pairing didn't really work very well. We need an Eli Vanto, right? And thankfully, it looks like he's going to be back in the next one, at least according to the little tiny blurb they've given us.
So was the guy I couldn't place the name of, right? Yeah. Right.
And I mean, he was a great character to be right there alongside Thrawn, because Thrawn is at his best when he's more of a Sherlock Holmes. The Thrawn novel did a really good job with that by using Eli and him trying to figure out what Thrawn was thinking as a nice way of kind of getting into his head. Like you said, Sherlock Holmes and Watson. And yet here, Anakin, it was more of a contrast between the two styles than any kind of Watson-Holmes dynamic, especially then once you add Padme into the mix, it's really kind of stops being anything about their interplay. It gives us a story that's, if you were reading something in canon for the first time, you'd be like, oh my goodness, this is an interesting twist. But anybody who's read the Legends continuity is like, oh my goodness, that twist is something that existed in Legends for years. I don't care.
They had this one cool thing, though, in the novel to exemplify the force powers that he was using. He would call it, was it second sight? Yeah, and it was really kind of cool. But on the audio version, it was a little distracting. It didn't really work as well as it did in print, but it was a really cool idea that you could see how Anakin or Vader is seeing 3 or 4 moves ahead with other people. So I think you and I read the same book, and it's a shame that Timothy Zahn he writes well, but sometimes his books always don't land. I've read so many of his Star Wars books now. Everyone can't be gold. I'm sure there are some people out there who enjoyed this book more than we did, but
one thing I would say, the Vader side was actually the one that rubbed me the worst, and that was just because there's so many instances of, you will tell me now or else. Okay, you can wait type of things with Vader that it kept drawing out. But you sort of zip through Last Shot. I'll say Last Shot was one I enjoyed more than I enjoyed Thrawn Alliances. And the fact that we had the different time periods all linking together, I thought worked really well. The only thing that bothered me really about Last Shot was that for a book that is taking place in multiple time periods, they screwed up when one of the time periods take place, because somehow L3 is around after she's been destroyed and loaded into the Falcon. So his own dating inside his book that is supposed to be bouncing around all over the place didn't actually work with what we got with the film, and somebody should have caught that at some point. If you can turn your chronology mind off, like I can sometimes do, then I found that a much more enjoyable romp, especially with the banter between Han and Lando than we necessarily got. That's sort of the buddy thing. I think you're trying to make Anakin / Thrawn almost like a buddy thing, like they come from 2 different worlds kind of thing, but it just...
Yeah, Last Shot, I zipped through it, Nathan, because I reviewed it for the show already. I like that you brought that in because I didn't realize that. I did not bring that during my review. I totally missed that. So that's a good thing to think about when you're reading the book. I don't really have much to talk about with the other junior novels. Maybe you had something else. The Mighty Chewbacca in the Forest of Fear, that was a good listen. And so was Lando's Luck that came out in September or October. They were fun to listen to while I listened to them, but to be quite frank, they're kind of forgettable. I like the idea of a new Lando novel very much, and I'm really enjoying the resurgence of Lando now that Solo, a Star Wars story, has brought him back into the fore, and I hope we get more of that. And hopefully an L3 and Lando adventure would be great. The 3 Lando novels that were referred in Solo, a Star Wars story, all 3 of them had name drops in there. It would be great to have a new set of adventures with just Lando and L3 going around the galaxy, and Lando's Luck was the first thing we got towards that. Did you read, by chance, The Adventures in Wild Space or Join the Resistance? I know those are junior novel series. Are you reading those entire novel series, and are those something that our younger readers should enjoy?
I have been reading through them. Join the Resistance is one where I've read the first 2. I haven't read this year's Attack on Starkiller Base, though I really like the fact that they are dovetailing it into The Force Awakens, clearly. I thought that was pretty interesting. That was the series that had, of course, the incredible farting wedding for Kare Kun and Timon / Snap Wexley. The Lando stuff looks interesting. I haven't had a chance to take a look at it. With the younger reader stuff, I really dug stuff like Rose Tico, Resistance Fire. I like all those sort of first-person, not really journals, but similar to journal type things. And you mentioned one other one. What was the other you mentioned?
Adventures of Wild Space, yeah.
I almost forgot that one because that one actually, I read it the previous year. That was one that was released in the UK first, and they really lagged behind with actually reprinting it in the US. But that one I actually enjoyed pretty much. I mean, for what it is, it's definitely one for younger kids to check out. And what's interesting about that is they're using it kind of as connective tissue with IDW, the comics, because the main characters of those, their descendants or older versions of the same characters wind up being the characters that form the framing stories of Tales from Vader's Castle and for the Star Wars Adventures series, the Tales from Wild Space chunk of the Star Wars Adventures comics from IDW. So they've kind of made the Graff family into one of these multi-generational Star Wars families that give us the backdrop of stories, kind of like, the Skywalkers and others have.
That's great, because I've actually read some of the Star Wars Adventures. I've bought a whole bunch. I think I bought issues 1 through 8 for my kids, and I've actually read them. Kind of enjoyed them. It's a great transition now into the comics. Comics had a huge year in 2018, whereas novels were not as huge. Comics, I thought, were just, wow, the stuff that's coming out this year in comics is amazing. Now, I'm not as up to date on comics as you are. I did read through Dr. Aphra's last series, her remastered storyline. I was able to read that. I have not started Worst Among Equals. And what I'm talking about, folks, is they have the comic runs of like 6 to 8 issues. Then they put them out in trade paperbacks. Star Wars Adventures is the kid comic version of Star Wars comics, and they're kind of fun. They're individual stories, and they've come out with a couple of trade paperbacks of those as well. Star Wars, the actual Star Wars comic, it concluded the Ashes of Jeddah, which I have not read, and the Mutiny on Mon Cala, which began. I'm behind. I think I'm like 2 or 3 series behind there. But what I'm interested in, Nathan, is we talked about this previously. Has a Star Wars comic and the new Darth Vader one, have they kept up or improved from where they were in this year? Is 2018 a banner year for the Star Wars ongoing comic and the Darth Vader one, or is it an off year for that series?
I think they're actually doing both pretty well. The Star Wars ongoing series switched from Jason Aaron to Kieran Gillen, who is also the one who had done the earlier Darth Vader series. So we got some sort of darker stuff. We've got some things that tie between generations. For instance, Mutiny at Mon Cala ties into Burning Seas from Darth Vader, Dark Lord of the Sith. The new Darth Vader series, or the second, I guess, Darth Vader series.
Yeah.
Because there is going to be yet another one.
Why?
Because you need more Vader, I guess.
Yeah, but the first one was so much fun, right? I really liked that first series, and they decided to stop that and go here.
See, I'm the opposite. With the original Vader, aside from Aphra, that series left me completely cold. But now that Charles Soule is doing Darth Vader, Dark Lord of the Sith, that one I'm really enjoying. Maybe it's the time frame that it's in, the fact that it's set back right after Revenge of the Sith or shortly after Revenge of the Sith. But the new Darth Vader series, really good stuff as far as dark storylines set in that Jedi Purge kind of era, post-Jedi Purge era. Downside, no Aphra, not around at that point. But I think they both turned out pretty well. Those two, Charles Soule and Kieran Gillen, are really sort of the current kings of Star Wars comic writing in terms of making them really good. But then you have those instances where they're like, hey, we got an annual coming up. Let's just hand it off to some random person who hasn't been reading and doesn't know what the heck is going on so they can screw up some continuity or something for us with a story that's not only bad continuity but also just isn't good. Can we do that? Can we bring someone in for that?
There you go.
So other than the annuals, I think that the ongoing series have been going quite well. I mean, and the same thing with Poe Dameron reaching a point where it's sort of dovetailing a little bit, although it left a nice big gap between it and The Force Awakens for Resistance to fit into, between one of its last arcs and Force Awakens, so it's not quite as dovetailing into the film itself as we expected. It wound up having a nice send-off for the series, not just for the main run before The Force Awakens, but for a storyline that was given us basically a framing story that takes place actually right after The Last Jedi.
And you're saying Poe Dameron's over. They're ending that series.
Yes, the Poe Dameron series is done.
And they started a couple of new series. We've mentioned Tales from Vader's Castle. That's just a 5-part thing.
This they've launched it, but that's not a Marvel thing. That wasn't a one has cleared the decks. That's IDW, just like Star Wars Adventures. Right. So Star Wars Adventures, all kind of the kiddie fare. They're not going to mean anything in the long run. They barely mean anything to each other.
So the new ongoing series then would be the new anthology series, The Age of Republic and the Han Solo Imperial Cadet, which both of those just started late, like last month or something, right? Those are the 2 new ongoing series to replace Poe Dameron?
They're new, but Imperial Cadet is a miniseries.
Oh, I thought that was an ongoing series. I had no idea.
From what I understand, it's a miniseries. The Age of stuff, Age of Republic, Age of et cetera, those are, it's sort of a maxi series, as I sometimes call it, where it's a limited amount, but there's enough of them that it's going to wind up being about the same length as Poe Dameron or so when it's done. To me, the standout this year, though, it was Aphra again.
Yeah, she was great. The whole remaster storyline I thought was much better than the one the previous year. I really enjoyed this year's storyline. It was really fun to read. And the artwork was amazing. That new character they introduced, the antagonist love interest, was phenomenal.
Tovin. And they've really done, with Aphra, what they've managed to do, it's funny. You've got all this complaining about, should Star Wars be more representative or less representative? Should Star Wars have more inclusion or less inclusion? And are you pushing an agenda to include characters who are, say, gay or this or that? And here's a character in Aphra who is a gay character, but at no point is that something that anyone's beat over the head with. It is part of her character. It's a natural fit. That's just part of who she is. And what they wind up playing into with bringing in a character like Tovin or Sana Starros, you had people initially complaining, oh, here we go, politically correct, blah, blah, blah. And no, what we're getting is human beings in really screwed up relationships because of the choices that one human being could make. You know, it doesn't matter what gender these characters are. They could be different alien species that even have no genders like ours. It's choices being made by these really compelling, interesting characters that lead them into situations where there's almost a no-win scenario and everybody's just coming out wrecked.
Yeah, it was so much fun to have. They had to double cross each other, but at the same time, they were desperately attracted to each other. And they gave themselves windows of time to be with each other. And then after that was over, they turned themselves into the other. It was really so much fun. It was a give and take. I don't want to say any sort of comparison. You just read it. It's a lot of fun. And the whole run was great. I have no idea where they're going next, but I want to find out. They really got me more invigorated with that series. I have not read Lando Double or Nothing. That's a 5-part comic series that came out this year with the young Lando Calrissian. The trade paperback just came out. Same thing with Mace Windu. That paperback has just come out, so you can read that whole series. I'm behind on that. I have not read the Beckett one-shot yet either, or the comic adaptations of Last Jedi or Solo. I'm sure they're going to be great. But my question to you is,
Not
are
so
you
much.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
I got that from the cough. It's okay. I'm just trying to keep it moving here. The Lost Stars. Did you read the trade paperback version of that? Is it worth reading? Because the book was such a surprise. They also made a Thrawn, the original Timothy Zahn Thrawn book from last year. They made that into a comic adaptation. That's also available now in trade paperback. Is Lost Stars worth reading as a comic? Or is it just better off rereading the novel?
So I think it's going to be one of those ones where it's almost a Stover effect kind of thing. I think that you're going to get much more out of it if you read the book.
Okay.
But if you want to just get the basic story, you're still going to be able to really enjoy it with the manga adaptation, although it's only volume 1. The rest of it is not out yet. But that said, being able to read that book and have such a great experience of that, and then later sort of revisit the story and the characters so fondly by reading the Yin Press manga adaptation of it now that it's been translated and released over here, that was a great experience. So to me, it's one of the few times I would say, hey, here's these two things that tell the exact same story. You should actually read both and not just pick one or the other. It was, as always, I think the Lost Star story stands still as one of the better stories that we've gotten from current Star Wars publishing line.
Just really quickly, they released a few manga this year.
Standing correctly, though, the manga releases that are coming out now, these are just reprints of the ones we already got from Dark Horse that came years ago.
I haven't read them. I was going to ask you that very question.
They're excellent. They're really, really good. Unfortunately,
they were
there's only ones for the OT and for Phantom Menace. There weren't any released over here for any of the other films at that point. But yeah, they were terrific.
Maybe they'll change that. And speaking of re-releases, of course, this year they also continued the Star Wars Epic Collection, which are giant compilation books of previously released things. They do this for all Marvel superheroes as well. They did the Legacy series, the Clone Wars, Empire, Marvel Years, and Menace Revealed. All those runs, various volumes already out, so check those out. But you mentioned the games a few minutes ago, and I was surprised because as we did a little research for today, I was surprised that as many game things came out, even though they're pretty much just not video games or board games for that necessarily that I'm aware of, but more about the role-playing and miniatures, had multiple releases, which I was completely not aware of. I was really surprised they had that much going on. But I'm confused about one thing. The Fantasy Flight does the role-playing games, but when I was doing some research for today, it seems confusing. Are there 3 different role-playing games going on simultaneously?
Sort of. It's all one publishing line. All the games can be played interchangeably. Edge of the Empire is the product line that was released first and focuses on sort of the fringes of society, the smugglers and that sort of thing. So it's sort of a making your life in that hard galaxy. And then you got Age of Rebellion that premiered later. That is more about just the direct fight between rebels and Imperials. So typically you're playing as a rebel. And then Force and Destiny was the one that took what little bitty bits of Force stuff were introduced in the other two, blew that up, and that's much more about like sort of the Force users in hiding in the OT era and that sort of thing, and using the Force for light or darkness and so on. So there's those 3 that can be played together, but have different slight nuances that make it so that if you're focusing on one or the other, you're going to wind up getting more out of it. You also have a beginner game for each of those and a similar beginner game for The Force Awakens. But it's an RPG beginner game that has no actual RPG with it. It just uses the mechanics that go with the other games, and there is no broader game to go with it. And now we're also getting things like what we got this year with Dawn of Rebellion, which is because they've got to a point where they have so many source books out for each of these games. I mean, Edge of the Empire and Age of Rebellion are barely putting anything out anymore. And even Force and Destiny is down to a trickle because they've covered so much stuff already that what we're getting are these era source books where all the games were designed to take place basically shortly after A New Hope. But now here's an era source book if you want to play it in the era of the Rebels cartoon. Here's a source book coming up next year that is if you want to play in the era of the Separatist Crisis / Clone Wars era. So in essence, they've got three main ones, one that didn't ever actually spawn anything else, and this weird sort of, we're going to cover everything and not actually label it as any of them, sort of sub-product line that they've just launched in the last year. But it's all Fantasy Flight games, and the games all play similarly enough that you can very easily pick one up and switch to another one without having to relearn everything.
All right. It just sounds confusing to me listening to
you
you talk
it's
about
absolutely.
it. So.
It's definitely
I don't
confusing.
know. I just wanted to make sure everyone who's listening who cares about that sort of thing understands what the differences are. The two new miniature stuff, Tyrants of Lothal and Legion, those are the same game, right? Just two different...
No.
They're doing the same thing?
So with the miniatures games, there are four.
Oh,
you can divide them up into space versus land. So Tyrants of Lothal is an expansion for a game that's been out for a while. That's Imperial Assault. So that one is combat on the ground. It's character versus other characters and that sort of thing with different mission objectives. And it's on these map tiles that are in a grid. So it's a very regimented movement style. It's very kind of turn-based strategy type stuff. Whereas Legion, which is brand new, is much more of sort of a Warhammer type of game where you've got your miniatures and you're moving around a battlefield in a relatively fast-paced sort of way, doing battle and just trying to wipe out the other side without as much in terms of like story-based objectives or campaign type things that you could play. So very different, but similar in that those are the two that are ground-based. Though I'd be remiss if I didn't note that of their other two games, the X-Wing and Armada, the space ones, X-Wing had a full reboot this year.
Oh.
X-Wing's second edition just launched, which completely overhauls big chunks of the gameplay. They're re-releasing everything, and they've put out conversion kits so that if you want to play with your old ships without having to repurchase them, you basically get all the cards and such that you need to play with 2.0, and they're also finally, for the first time, beyond just having Rebels, Imperials, Scum and Villainy, First Order, and Resistance, which didn't really get a whole lot of play anyway, they're now expanding it to add more Resistance, more First Order, and Clone Wars era Separatist versus Republic ships into the mix, starting with the next wave that comes out very soon. So X-Wing is the big thing, and the launch of Legion is the other big thing, I would say. Armada and Imperial Assault are just kind of on cruise control.
Gotcha. So that's all there is for games, guys, and that's it. Although I should be mentioning that the original Star Wars role-playing game from West End Games had a 30th anniversary reissue edition thing. I was thinking that's just for collectors.
And it's from Fantasy Flight Games, so if you search Star Wars role-playing, you'll run into that too, just to make it more confusing on their website.
Of course. And I have those two books on my shelf. I never played the game, but back when I was in college, I really enjoyed reading through, because back then that was really all you could get for background stuff, because that was just at the dawn. Well, I actually had it in college, but it came out before Timothy Zahn started writing Heir to the Empire, right? So from 87 to 91, that was all that was really available for background material on Star Wars, the new stuff. So it was really kind of fun. And even though the EU had started, I was reading that source book constantly, and it was being referred to in all these novels for quite some time. So after that, we should quickly touch on new reference books. They're basically redoing old ones for the most part, different new and weird ways. Of course, we got Art of Solo came out as a tie-in to the movie. They had new visual dictionary, Encyclopedia of Starfighters, Star Wars lightsabers. I didn't pick any of these up. I might pick up the Art of Solo because I do enjoy the art books. It's not really a reference book, but I kind of packaged it together here. The classic newspaper comics, that's the ones that ran on a daily strip and then on Sunday. Volume 3. I read Volume 1 this year. I finally got that for a gift. I loved reading Volume 1. I, of course, read parts of these back when Dark Horse re-released them and redid them. This is the first time I've ever read them in their original format, and I need to catch up on Volume 2 before I read this year's Volume 3. These are expensive books. For me, they're worth having because I know I'm going to pick them up again and read them later. But I think they're more of reference because they're kind of vintage stuff. But they got a whole bunch more. They have like Women of the Galaxy, Smuggler's Guide, Scum and Villainy, Corellian Fighter Owner's Workshop Manual, all different kinds of reference books. If you're into that sort of, I always call it nonfiction Star Wars, even though it's quite fictional. Nathan, forgive me if I'm rushing through these. Did you pick up any of these that you want to highlight as something that you would advise our listeners if they're going to pick one or two to pick up?
Sure. I picked up several of them. I would say Complete Visual Dictionary would be great for those who don't have any of the previous ones. It is a rehash of previous material from other books kind of combined together.
Is it DK stuff, like the DK ones? Or
yeah,
something?
Yeah, it's like the old visual guides and stuff just kind of pulled together, or the kind of stuff we get. Sometimes it's called a visual guide, sometimes it's called something else, but it's those big, white pages with all the images on it and a little bit of text and some captions kind of guides.
Right.
I would say the ones that stood out to me for sort of this other category, sort of guides, oddballs and stuff like that. One is Smuggler's Guide. If you are someone who has been following that product line of things like Jedi Path, Book of Sith, this is the newest in that line. It's a different company. This time it's Epic Inc. You got the nice presentation kind of box in it. You've got the actual item that kind of looks like it's a smuggler's lockable, almost like a journal case or something. You have to turn a little thing to open it up. It's got the sounds to go with it and whatnot, a hidden compartment for the book, little in-universe documents to go with, little artifacts. Very cool stuff. If you're into that sort of thing, but you only want to read the in-universe book and not have all the little goodies in the case that skyrockets the price, Rebel Files from last year just came out this year in a book-only form, so it's a lot more affordable now. And we didn't touch on, I don't know what category this would fall into. It's not really a guidebook. I'd be remiss not to mention Jedi the Last. I love the Shakespeare Star Wars stuff.
Yes.
I wish that the prequels were done in audiobook form, because the audiobooks with the full casts are fantastic for these. But yeah, the one for Last Jedi came out this year too.
It's really funny you should mention that, because I have it down, but I had no idea where to put it. I think I might have put it at the tail end of novels in my cheat list here. I actually listened to The Force Doth Awaken this year, and I had a blast. I'm the same way. I am not going back to reading the books on these. I'm going to exclusively listen to the audio whenever possible. It is so much fun to listen to the audio, and they're fairly short. They don't really dawdle. It's really just a script. So yes, I have missed this one. I have not listened to the episode 8 one yet, but I definitely will be picking that up. I'm hoping Santa will bring that one, but we'll see. There's something that came out last month that I have no idea what it is, and maybe you have a clue. It's called the Star Wars Archives, episodes 4 through 6, 77 through 83. It's called like a reference book with OT information with a new interview with George Lucas, and they're calling Star Wars a modern monomyth. So I'm really wondering what this is all about and what could they possibly tell us that's new. And a new interview from George Lucas. Well, hey, it's a selling point right there. Have you actually picked this up?
I have not picked it up. If I remember correctly, though, it's compilation and reporting on the reportage of that era, of sort of like, the articles that had been written about Star Wars in that time. I'm not sure off the top of my head if it's sort of has a narrative to tie it together, or if it's actual reprints of article after article after article. But it's supposed to be sort of a snapshot from a historian would call it a primary source perspective, because it was written at the time, but it wasn't necessarily written by those who were involved at the time. So not really a making of book per se, more like sort of if you want to know kind of how the public was experiencing Star Wars in that era through news media and whatnot, this would be a cool one to look at.
So you get none of that from the Amazon.com
No.
pictures. And it says like Lucas narrates his own story. Everything you're talking about sounds somewhat interesting, but you're not getting any of that in the description on Amazon. So it's not an inexpensive book. It's $180. And some of the photos they're highlighting we've seen before, some of them we haven't. But, at this point, it's been 40 years and we have quite a lot of these reference books already. If this thing drops in price, I'll try to check it out. But I just wanted to bring it up as the high-priced option for this year is definitely the Star Wars Archive. So just to finish up here, the year in publishing, Rebels was finally released on DVD, the final season. Of course, Resistance is now going. We have no DVD releases on that as far as I understand. When I say DVD, home video. Lego had some stuff. I know Star Wars Insider is publishing a whole bunch of articles or I think content or the best of their things. I don't really know why they're doing that, but I'm sure people are buying them. Do you buy these books or just keep to the Insider magazines?
I keep to the magazines. The only thing with Insider that I would really want as a best of would be short fiction, and they gave up on that.
Yeah, yes, exactly. I think you've mentioned that before. Of course, there's all sorts of different kinds of things we haven't talked about this year. There's kid-related things and golden books, and there's something called the Last Jedi movie theater storybook and movie projector, which I'm sure my son would love just by the title of that. But we actually picked up a couple of the read-along storybooks, Last Jedi, and they finally did the prequel trilogy in that format, and my family enjoys those. And of course, and we're talking about publishing, Last Jedi on home video, Solo, a Star Wars story as well, Lego Freemaker Adventures, and as we already mentioned, the Rebels Complete Season 4. That would be right up your alley with,
yes.
And you bought every single version of those releases, right?
Well, of course. I would say that not just from the U.S., but from the U.K. and some from Japan, too.
Yeah,
But I'll say that if there's anything that stands out about the home video stuff this year, one thing is this was the first time that we saw Star Wars home video releases in 4K, which is awesome. It was also the year that 3D died for Star Wars releases in the US, although thankfully you can import them from other regions. And this is also the year we saw yet another weird twist in the way that the Lego Star Wars home video releases were handled, in that after Freemaker Adventures got not only some little like bonus magnets and whatnot last time around, but also got a Blu-ray and a DVD release to choose from. This time it was DVD only, kind of backsliding as far as that goes. But they've done that before. They've started with Blu-ray and backslid to DVD also. So it was an interesting year for that. It's been a long time since we've had a year where we had 2 different Star Wars films getting major home video releases in the same year. In fact, aside from, thinking about the special edition or something, we haven't really seen that before. So it was really cool to actually see all the hubbub a couple of times. But you can tell some of the fervor is dying down, because even some of the really cool ones you can get from overseas, like what Japan's Movie Next does with these great, awesome box sets, didn't happen for Solo. So I wonder if we're slowly seeing a tapering off of the really in-depth stuff to just, hey guys, here's 4K, but otherwise just get it digitally, will you?
Yeah, I think with the episode 9 being a full year away, they'll have some chance to build momentum up for that. And then after that, who knows, honestly. After the Skywalker saga is completed, it's anyone's guess on what's going to happen there.
Disney Plus.
I'm already planning on getting that. It's not even a question for me, not only because of the Star Wars, but all the other content too. So Disney Plus is a no-brainer for probably everyone listening to this right now, mostly because of the Star Wars for a lot of us, but for some of us, other content as well. So that's the year in publishing pretty much. If you need a full list of what came out this year in publishing, actually Wikipedia has an amazing list that is available to you. Just type in 2018 in their search field, and a lot of that will come up. It's almost too big, but it certainly is exhaustive and what you need. I hope we gave you some insights that you weren't aware of. We hope you will discover publishing that you did not know existed yet, or agreed or disagreed with what we talked about. And you can certainly air your opinions over at the forums at swactionnews.com. Of course, also on Facebook, Twitter. We're all over the place, folks. You know where to find us. Nathan, you mentioned Timeline Gold has ended. Where can our listeners find you on the internet, interweb, anywhere else? Where can they find you and all your insights in 2019?
Well, I'll tell you, probably the best place to find me now is probably YouTube. YouTube.com/Chrono Radio. Chrono like chronology, radio. After that's my old podcast from back in the day. Right. Because that's where a lot of the interaction is happening through comments. And I've actually just launched a series of mini Q&A videos where people want to drop comments on previous ones of those. I answer them coming up, so we're able to have kind of an ongoing conversation. A Saga on Home Video, you can find that on Amazon. And most of the projects I'm involved with, you can find over on Twitter, on Facebook, and you can find the podcast that I'm involved with, Star Wars Beyond the Films and Cloud City Casino, both at StarWarsReport.com. Anything else is kind of tangential at this point.
Of course it is.
I think.
But yeah, look, you have plenty of options for us, and the YouTube stuff is great. I really do enjoy that, so keep that up. It's good stuff. Thank you, everyone, for listening. Nathan, I hope you will join me next year at this time to recap 2019, and ideally we'll have some more novels that we'll be more excited to talk about, some comics that are worth our time, and some other surprises along the way that will make us very, very happy. But here's my prediction, and it's not much of a prediction. It's probably a given. Journey to blank is going to have a whole bunch of stuff for us to talk about this time next year. Whatever that blank is, of course, is whatever they call episode 9. Well, thanks, everybody. We'll talk to you soon. Thanks for watching this video. You can see full episodes of Star Wars Action News with more collecting news and reviews at swactionnews.com. We also have thousands of toy and collectible photos in our photo gallery. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe to our YouTube channel. May the pegs be stocked and the Force be with you.